Rabbi Yoshi, thank you. I want to say it was so long ago that, believe it or not, I had hair, and it was so long ago Yoshi did not. Just made that up. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really, really delighted to be with you in person and virtually. The title of my talk is The Future of American Judaism, and I want to just say the future, when I look at the clergy team here, I look at the vibrancy of the synagogue, look at the partnership that Stephen Wise has had with HUC, it makes me feel very optimistic and very excited. I want to recognize my chief of staff who's here, Jessica Silver, and Matt Lockheim, who's here, who's also a member of our board. It's a great partnership that we have, and I'm grateful for you for that support. I want to say that the future of American Judaism depends in no small part on the leadership of our American Jewish communities as exhibited here. Any great community is great not only because of the people, but because of the leaders that can coalesce it. And here I want to start with a note of concern that the tendency and the trends in American Judaism are declining, less membership, less engagement, et cetera. And given that backdrop, I'm so excited to share with you that we are about to launch 16 new rabbinical students off to train for a great new Year in Israel program. Rabbi Zweibeck ran that program for a few years, a number of years ago before coming here. We're just so excited for that new class, and as excited as we are for those 16 new students, 15 new students that are coming, the concern is reflected in leadership too, because just 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we were having 40, 50, 60, even 70 students start. And again, the numbers coming in this year are a low of 15. Now that sounds bad. You could say, uh-oh, HUC is really on the decline. We remain the largest seminary. All of the traditional seminaries are seeing the same kind of decline. So the question that we have to ask in terms of the future, what are we doing about it? And in order to ask what are we doing about it, we have to ask what are the causes of it? And I bet if I asked you what are the causes of it, let me ask you, anyone here in the audience have an idea? What might be the causes? Why aren't so many people going? Anything strike you? Yes, say that again? Intermarriage. What about intermarriage? So thank you. So the response for those on Zoom is that intermarriage, the concern is from the congregation, from the kahal, that it pulls both partners away from Judaism, and that is one trajectory of intermarriage. But there's another story of intermarriage that it actually is pulling people in, and we're seeing a lot of that. So that's a good hypothesis, and it's unclear what the effect is, except that it looks like it's a great avenue for inclusion as well as it might be an off-ramp. So it's good that you're saying that. Another possibility for the decline? Any other thoughts about this? Let me give you some usual suspects that we hear. Number one, declining membership. If there's declining membership in congregations, there's going to be declining numbers of people ready to take the step to become a rabbi, to become a cantor. When I was confirmed in 1982 in Baltimore Hebrew congregation, there were 60 or 70 of us in the confirmation class. I think last year, Baltimore Hebrew congregation, which is still one of the largest, maybe the largest congregation in Baltimore, I think it had 15 students in their confirmation class. So if you have fewer students coming up through the ranks, you're going to have fewer that are going to make the choice to be rabbis. Here's another one, increased secularization. More and more of our community, particularly under the age of the 30, does not think of themselves as religiously Jewish. They talk of themselves as just Jewish. And if it's more secular, what kind of secular Jew is going to become a rabbi? And in fact, even as we have 15 new rabbinical students, this year for the first year ever, and with the Zeldin family in mind, the Z School, the Zellico School of Jewish Nonprofit Management, will enroll more students than our rabbinical school. They will come in at 16 students. Matt, that's news to you. I just found that out from Adam today. So we're seeing a shift. Secular does not mean not necessarily a belief in the spirit or God, but it is a distancing from it. People still looking for meaning and purpose. And finally, as your team can attest to, these jobs that we are trying to build capacity and build strength in are really hard. And they've just gotten more difficult. I bet you didn't know you would have to be a production expert and know tech. You have to be a pastor. You have to be a social justice activist or a supporter. You have to be a scholar, a teacher. You have to be somebody that can run an organization. So how do you do this job? All of those are challenges. Now, those are the easy answers. Those are the easy causes. But I like to look for indirect causes, not the ones that are obvious. I'm reminded in 1840, who doesn't think of 1840 when you think of things to reference? A Hungarian physician, Semmelweis was his name. He had a problem that he was trying to solve for, that whole units of his in the hospital were dying of childbed fever. And he looked at all the obvious explanations, epidemic and overcrowding, diet, or rough treatment by the doctors examining the women. And none of them could explain the difference. The only thing that he saw was that in this ward, the death rate was very much higher than in this ward. That was the only difference. And so he started to look at, well, what were the doctors doing? And the doctors examining this ward were coming from surgery directly. The doctors examining this ward and the other ward were not coming from surgery. They were coming as the first group of patients to examine. And he said, wait a second, maybe there's something that's happening in surgery, or what we would say not happening after surgery. They weren't washing their hands. And it was, who would have thought? You were looking at different things. It's how we got to antisepsis today and a theory of microbes as what infects people. And so it's the idea that we don't think of the indirect. So what are some of the indirect possibilities? So I want to just mention three before wrapping up and talking about our future, because we have to solve this problem. Number one, I think we have to look at what the average age is, or we have to think about the dynamics of the times that people are being raised. Average age of rabbinical students around 26 or so. And if they're 26 and we see the decline in the rabbinical students coming into our program happening around 2006, you go back 26 years, you're at the year 1980. What's happening in 1980 that affected their childhood? And it's really, if you look politically, which is how I think, is the Reagan Revolution and a real shift in a number of things in the United States. Number one, Reagan and followed by Bush and Clinton, the economics of it, fueled unprecedented levels of inequality, unprecedented in our lifetime. And as inequality expands, the difference between going into service professions versus going into economically more lucrative professions grows and grows and grows. And so it becomes less and less financially sustainable to do this, and you're thinking, well, maybe not. That's number one. Number two, there's an enmeshment that happens with the Reagan's generation of politics and religion, particularly politics on the right, where religious fundamentalists, of course, get involved in the politics of the right, of right politics. And what that means for particularly Reform Jews, who just descriptively, with whatever your politics are, whatever mine are, whatever leaving that aside, descriptively, Reform Jews tend to be on the more liberal side. And if you see a religion being associated with the politics you don't like, you are less likely to be engaged with that because political identity is much more robust over time than religious identity. It's just a way of saying if you were born a Democrat or Republican, you're likely going to be a Democrat or Republican when you get to the end of your life, but our religious engagement ebbs and flows. So those are these are all hypotheses that we need to start investigating. Number two, there is something about technology. Jonathan Haidt, in a recent Atlantic article entitled "Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid." It's a great title for a great article. But he notes the following. In 2010, something went terribly wrong. In 2010 is right about the time that we see admissions declining significantly. We are disoriented, unable to speak the same language or recognize the same truth. We are cut off from one another and from the past. And what happened? Social media has weakened social capital, institutions, and shared stories. What happens around this time? 2007, the iPhone. 2008, Facebook and social media. We are becoming so internalized that we're not thinking about community. And when we're not thinking about community, We don't think of leadership of community. And finally, the Millennial Generation. The average age of the grad student, because millennials are adulting later. I have 2 millennial kids. They are definitely adulting later. They delay getting started, and older students tend to be geographically less flexible. And so that means that when they choose to go back to graduate school, we're seeing the age of graduate education up and up, and particularly with fewer and fewer students being able to move by the time they want to go to graduate school. Our program, LA, New York, currently Cincinnati, but in the future just LA and New York, so that's going to be a challenge. So what do we have to do? Just in conclusion, few key items to look at. Number one, we have to be strengthening student financial support. We have to go to a place where we're investing not only to cover tuition, but also to provide stipends and supplements so that we can begin to narrow the gap, and so that the economic differential between becoming a rabbi and a servant to the Jewish people does not become so huge. Number two, we have to recognize that people are increasingly living longer lives. They're starting their lives later, adulting, and they're living longer lives. They're able to engage in technology and build a low residence program so that, like your cantor, you can be studying, but you don't have to move out of where you are. So if you're in North Dakota or you're in Seattle or you're in LA, you can study at HUC online, bring people together on occasion a few times each year. We'd like to do it in Cincinnati, and begin to build leadership no matter where people are. Number three, build out pipeline programs. Understand that shrinkage of the confirmation class that I talked to you about, if the pools are shrinking, we need to repopulate and get into them through college and high school program. Number four, the bifurcation of ideas in our civil society, which is part of the fragmentation. We have to be in a seminary, the place where ideas are thriving, where we welcome people no matter what their views of Jewish theology are, politics, or identity, and use it as a sacred space to encourage those kinds of conversations. And finally, to the point that the woman, thank you, the congregant raised just a moment, we need to re-examine our policies that restrict the number of students that come in if they are in interfaith relationships. We need to look at that carefully and soon and quickly, because it's at a gap with our congregations, and it could be a way to attract more students. So, quite frankly, we're not going to be successful, and the future of American Judaism will not be successful unless we continue to be in a position of producing the kind of leaders that you have here at Stephen Wise Temple: dynamic, innovative, excited, people that understand that the job of a rabbi, of a cantor, of a Jewish clergy is to comfort people in times of sorrow, is to celebrate with them in times of joy, is to build communities of meaning and purpose based on our tradition and our texts and our practices, just like you've done here at Stephen Wise Temple. And it's for those reasons that I use this synagogue and so many like them in our reform movement as guideposts. What do we need to do to support you? Because so many of you have been so supportive of us. So with that, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your partnership and collaboration, and I look forward to working out these problems in the years ahead, growing, not just accepting the shrinkage, but growing as we figure out what are those microbes coming in that we're not even seeing, addressing those problems and building back even stronger. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you so much.